This is the DRS train.
Bit better than the Bahrain one. I'm Peter Brook. I'm joined by Nav, Nedzo's F1 Gridbox, and Ace Shield, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. So yesterday we had the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Interesting race. We saw more bottling from Lando. Oscar's become our first dual or consecutive winner in almost a year. Max has gotten himself in trouble with the stewards and is not angry. So there's some interesting stuff to take away from that race, I think.
So first of all, I wanna go out in defense of McLaren. I see that car in Jeddah, but also in other races, can ride the curves like no other car. Whenever any driver went through turn 4 at Jeddah, they always had to lift because in the exit they couldn't afford to take too much of that curve. But in Q3, if you watch Piastri's onboard lap, you see that Piastri does not care about taking the curb. He just goes into the corner, and once he's on the curb, the car starts to oversteer, to lose it, and he simply has to countersteer and keep his foot on the gas, and the car settles again. So the McLaren is excellent at riding curbs, and there is an advantage, but I got the feeling that it's not only an advantage, it's also a hurdle in the sense that both McLaren drivers, need to not only have surgical precision in the trajectories, not only insane feeling for the limit of the car, but then they also need an insane car control to really extract the most out of the car. So while I do think that the McLaren is the best car right now, it is not at all easy to drive. And I know what everyone is gonna say, yes, the Red Bull is also not easy to drive, but the Red Bull is not easy to drive because that's what Max Verstappen tends to like. Of course, he enjoys a stable car that he can push and hustle around, but when a car becomes edgy, Max Verstappen can cope with it. Instead, the difficulty in driving the McLaren is of a different nature. It is simply that it allows the drivers to do more, and so to exploit the car the most, the drivers are required more than what they would be required in the Red Bull, in the McLaren, the Ferrari, to extract the most out of the car. So, yes, I do think that Lando Norris' mistakes was very disappointing. I don't have a better adjective, sorry. And yes, Piastri should have gotten pole, but I don't hold it up that much against them. I believe that the McLaren, while it is superior, it is not the Red Bull 2023 or Mercedes 2020 kind of superiority.
Well, same. Surprisingly, I agree with the thought that McLaren shouldn't be criticized as much for this quali session, mostly because of the onboards from the two best laps from Piastri and Verstappen. Everyone was quick to pick up on Piastri's sector 1 being slower than Max and his entry into turn 2 being a bit different, and that's where Max was able to really make gains. But then in sector 2, Max also made a mistake, or maybe that was his line, but Piastri's line was much better than Max, and he made up that 10th again. So I'm actually of the view that Max's lap was not perfect. It looked perfect because he came back, and there's this view in Formula One that if you come back basically, then it means the lap was really good, a bit like the 2023 Monaco lap from Max. That wasn't a sublime lap. He just managed to close down the gap on Alonso because he was 2 tenths down, but the Red Bull was faster in that sector 3 anyway. So again, the Jeddah 25 lap was very good, but it really wasn't one of his very, very best. It was one of his best achievements, yes, to get pole, but he loses at least a tenth in that sector 2 just from taking a different line. So yeah, I actually would say that in quali the two cars were were a bit closer than people would think, and it could have swung either way. And both of them lost a tenth, and it ended up with this nice situation of 100 between them.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It could have swung either way, but for Lando, it swung straight into a barrier, which for me was hilarious because I spent this entire time trying to prove to everyone that he's just a B-Tech version of Pastor Maldonado, and I think today proved that or not today, yesterday or the day before that, proved that correct. Piastri did.
You delivered a really good line with a swung into a barrier. Then you drop a B-Tech Pastor Maldonado just to make everyone just sigh after that incredible line. Thanks, Nedzo.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what can I say? I'm as inconsistent as Lando Norris. But yeah, it's just that I'm surprised that the McLaren is more difficult to drive than most top cars. Don't get me wrong. We've seen that the amount of mistakes that he's made, the amount of mistakes that Piastri made last year. Obviously now Piastri's sort of matured and he's reduced those. I mean, yes, Australia exists, but wet conditions and all that sort of stuff makes it kind of a caveat or a less prominent feature. And yeah, with McLaren it's tough because obviously those two aren't fully fleshed out, fully rigged champions yet. Lando has the pace but not the consistency. Oscar has the consistency but not the pace at the top end of the grid, and that's what they need. If they were to get a Verstappen or a Russell or even a Leclerc, I think that car would have been I think that whole position would have been by 1/10, maybe 2/10, and maybe they could have extracted another half a tenth over the course of a lap. But yeah, it's frustrating that we see like not a title battle really, because it's not Verstappen who's really in this title battle. He will fall away throughout the season because I think that McLaren the drivers will get more confident. Max's car's performance ceiling is much lower than the McLaren's is, I believe. And yes, we're at the 5th race of the season now. Oscar's finally got the championship lead. We'll get into the race in a second, I assume. But yeah, in qualifying, Lando was just abysmal. Like, I can understand if he'd have made one error and would have qualified a 10th, 2/10, even 3/10 off of Oscar and been. I think that would have put him probably 3rd or 4th because I think George was in the ballpark of the two in front. But to just crash out a corner like that, the way he did it like that by just going deep and getting over a curb is embarrassing. I'm sorry, it is, because it shows that he's trying to push harder than the car is capable of, and he doesn't need to do that. He's in the fastest car. He has no reason to be pushing as hard as he is in terms of try that level of I'm going to try and push it past what I think it can do. It's a bit ridiculous from him, and although his recovery was decent, this is definitely one of the stinker weekends for Lando Norris.
Yeah, and that's my main issue with Lando. It's not as much his mentality or his bottling, which are quite major. It's his racecraft and his driving IQ is not where it should be for a guy who's on his 7th season in Formula One. We'll get into the race, as you said, but just in quali, you have the experience to know that if you have a good car, your first Q3 lap is a banker lap. You don't crash on your first Q3 banker lap. Especially when you have such a good car, you just put that car in the top 5, and then you push later on, and that's something that Leclerc is actually quite good at doing. He would put the car into the top 4, and then in 2022 he used to either crash or get pole, but at least he would qualify in the top 5, and there was something to get on Sundays. And Lando, if he just qualified 4th or 5th, he would have finished 2nd, at least 3rd, maybe 2nd. So that's my main issue with him. He's making mistakes that are just a bit dumb from a racing standpoint.
I will just clarify my point when I called him a B-Tech Maldonado earlier on. I mentioned this on Twitter last night. I said that he's kind of inverse to what Maldonado was back in the day anyway, because Maldonado was, don't get me wrong, he had his incidents in races and with other drivers, but the main bulk of his incidents were in practice sessions, and when it didn't matter really, he would spin twice in a practice session over the course of a weekend, and then he might have an error in qualifying that makes him not get out of Q2 or whatever. But with Lando, he makes mistakes only in crucial moments, and then when he's not got any pressure on him, he seems to do decently well. Obviously, they're both drivers who are very fast on their day and have at points beating guys like Verstappen. Well, for Norris it's Verstappen because of the modern day era, and for back in Maldonado's day it was guys like Hamilton and Vettel. Maldonado on his day was faster than Hamilton and Vettel. Norris on his day is faster than Verstappen, Leclerc. It's just that those days don't come very often for Lando, especially. And yeah, that's why I make that comparison, because I see lots of parallels. It's just that Lando's errors come in more costly times, and that's why he gets a lot of pressure lumped onto him. And yeah, I mean, I think that the dynamic of if he'd qualified third, for example, would have been interesting, because would Oscar have pushed Max straight off, knowing that Lando would have been right there? Because I don't think George was much of a threat from the start. Would that entire first lap incident, which we'll get into, have happened if Lando was there in third or fourth, lurking behind? I know Lando isn't, as we said, isn't known for his racecraft and quote unquote racing IQ, but it would have been an interesting dynamic to see if that would have played out the same way. Because obviously Oscar and Max, if Max is fighting for the title, Oscar and Lando are the two drivers he's fighting with it for. So I don't think Oscar would have been as inclined to push Max off a circuit, because I think that's what he did. I don't think he'd have been inclined to do so had Lando been there. And yeah, Lando is the maker of his own downfall. I think he would have got second if he'd have qualified third, because I think Max would have been pushed off at the start, or if he didn't, it would have been the case that I think they would have filtered their way through eventually. They would have worked together, found some way to get it done, but that didn't happen.
I see the punchline in your discussion. You assume that if Norris started from third place, he would have been a threat. And the punchline is that if he were starting from third, he either would have screwed up the launch and dropped back behind the Mercedes, and so nothing, or he would have been out of the grid position, and so he himself would have gotten the 5-second penalty. So
that's a very good point. I will still disagree with Nedzo comparing Norris with Pastor. I still think Norris is a better driver. But anyway, Peter, what did you make of that turn one incident?
I mean, it points to, I think, how badly designed this circuit is, because it's almost impossible, it seems, to make an overtake at turn one without one or both drivers going off track. It's just too narrow and too tight. And again, it was a similar case with this is partly Lando being stupid, but also the circuit being stupid. He would try to pass Lewis and then get passed again immediately, because we have consecutive DRS zones that effectively invalidate one of only two overtaking spots on the track. But the obvious comparison is Abu Dhabi 21, that Lewis didn't get a penalty for effectively doing the same thing at a slightly faster corner, and it gets a bit exhausting that we now have this issue of trying to determine who quote unquote has the corner, and all the inside and out of this and all the particulars about etiquette around overtaking and racecraft. And it's maybe just design better circuits that have corners that aren't stupid and don't lend themselves to these kind of incidents, and actually give space for everyone and a bit of leeway, because otherwise you're just going to get people squeezing each other and forcing them to cut corners or putting them in the wall or whatever, because there's nowhere else to go.
Or have the Canada Monza situation where if you cut the corner, you need to go so far on the other side that you lose the position anyway. You know what I mean? Like in Canada?
Yeah, what you mean, like the escape road thingies they've got?
Or Sochi.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know how they would design that. With that corner, the only way that would work...
Yeah, of course, it doesn't work in Saudi.
Yeah, it would only work for the Alonso incident, because he was right on the outside after almost going in the wall. It's just an element of stupid circuit design, because that circuit is just nuts, and I don't know how it's on the calendar, to be honest.
I believe that this circuit, that corner would be fine if drivers just had to play ball. It's this idea that you can, the guy on the inside can just claim the corner and go, oh yeah, you don't exist, I'm going to force you off the circuit. I think that's ridiculous. I think that if Formula One is going to pride itself on not being like series like NASCAR, where you can just take people out or where you can push people off circuit just because, then they've got to adhere to that. And in my opinion, Oscar Piastri completely forcing Max that he had to go off. If Max doesn't go off circuit, people saying he should have backed off. He was alongside. He was fully alongside. If maybe a couple of half a foot behind him, and he should back out. No. I think that if drivers were forced to play ball, or you were to put a strip of grass or gravel on the entry or exits of those corners, it would work. But it's just the case that now, all of a sudden in Formula One, it's this ahead at the apex bollocks, where if someone is ahead at the apex, they can do whatever they want. They could do a Hitler salute in the middle of the track, and the FIA would probably allow it. It's so mind-bendingly stupid that we have a situation where these rules are implemented not for racing fairness, race integrity, because F1 is the only series that employs these. Around other series in the world, they actually produce fair and, most of the time, uncontroversial racing conduct. But because F1 is a show, they have to change it so that it's an arbitrary rule where the FIA can make decisions and make storylines by themselves. And I think they tried to do it here in Jeddah. I think instead of forcing Max to hand the position back, which would have created its own authentic-ish storyline, where he would have been right there trying to chase down or get back past Oscar, they made a 5-second time penalty because I think they would, thinking he would just get back, he would catch up to him and then try and re-overtake him, and then it would be a more dramatic conclusion to the race. For me, it's stupid. This idea that in 2021, Max, what's it called? He was on the inside, pushed the other guy right to the outside. It was with Lewis Hamilton then, and it was Max then who cut the corner because he just did, and he was being a bit of a terrorist that day. But with this one, the guy on the inside who pushed the other guy off doesn't get the penalty. They have to be consistent with these rulings, and until we get that consistency, no one's going to listen to the FIA and no one's going to respect them.
My tidbit on the turn 1 and 2 in Jeddah issue is that if the cars were smaller, nimbler, that corner would not be an issue. Two cars would be able to race each other in those two corners without pushing either one off the track. And instead we get these ground effect cars who cannot ride the curves, and so you get to turn 1 and you can't leave any space to the other on the outside, and basically the same thing happens in turn 2. And if the cars were nimbler, simply the car on the inside, in either turn 1 or turn 2, could simply ride the curb, and everybody would have as much space as they need.
I mean, that is a point. It's just that there are lesser in times where drivers have made overtakes and made passes, and they have gone side by side through turn 1 and 2. It is possible. I think that the majority of it is just because the drivers don't want to play ball. It is the case that if you are on the inside, you can just push other drivers to the outside. And it's not just at this circuit. We saw it multiple times last year with Max and Lando, like Cota, like Mexico. We saw it. And for me, it's just the driving standards are a bit poor. Like, the circuits are manufactured in a way that, yes, it does allow for this sort of stuff to happen. It's not an ideal corner. I think if it was slightly more open, if it was slightly wider, if there were more... if it was just a corner that was more better suited to this side-by-side racing with these cars, you could argue, yes, that it would have been a better outcome. But I think genuinely, if you were to put like a strip of grass or gravel on the like we had at Austria, I think that Max would have been penalised, because I don't think he'd have got ahead first of all. So it would have been self-policing in a way. So if he did gain any advantage, which I don't think he did, if he did gain an advantage, then it would have been automatically nullified. But it's this idea that instead of track limits and instead of racing being self-policing, where if someone barges you off, you have the absolute right next time they do something to do the exact same thing, instead of creating these rivalries that would essentially sort themselves out, it wouldn't mean that there wouldn't be any FIA interference where, is it a 5-second time penalty, or is it a racing incident, or is it a 10-second time penalty, or a drive-through? Instead of having that, if you were to hand those minor or those case-by-case unsure incidents where it's not 100% certain who's at fault, if you were to just say to the drivers, racing incident, and if there's something similar that happens, we'll also turn a blind eye, that would produce, in my opinion, better racing, and also produce racing where drivers will be less likely to force each other off the circuit so blatantly, because they'd be like, he will do that to me next time I try and overtake.
Having grass or gravel at Jeddah would be quite interesting. I don't know how they would implement that. But also, small Formula 2 segue here. I'm sure Peter and Ace saw what Gabriele Mini was doing with the turn 2. He made his own line there. So I think that's another good example of how drivers are treating it. The young drivers are just taking it as a straight and then using it as an excuse, really.
I mean, with the stewards being so inconsistent and stuff, they're just going to take chances wherever they can and just hope they don't get penalised or that they get away with it.
Mini was not keeping the position, though, by cutting turn 2. He gave the position up soon after. so he was not doing anything wrong. The one time later in that race where the driver didn't run off turn 2, Crawford spun out. Those F2 cars cannot race each other between turn 1 and turn 2. Yes, it's also because of the drivers, but Mini was always cutting turn 2, and he got made fun of because he couldn't take turn 2. Later on, one time a driver did not run off turn 2, the car on his side spun. Mini was only avoiding that by cutting turn 2. So, yeah, just the cars cannot race there.
And that also answers the question of, are the cars too big? Obviously, the cars are too big, but the Formula 2 cars are much smaller, and even they couldn't race there. So, yeah, not great.
But they cannot ride
Well,
the
back to
curbs.
McLaren. What did you think of Lando's race then? Was it a good one? Could it have been better? What was his strategy about? Do you think he could have gotten P3 with a better strategy? He looked exhausted after the race. If some of you have not seen his interviews after his post-race interviews, he looked like he had just gone through chemical warfare. I have never seen a driver like this. His face was completely battered. It was red. There were scars near his eye. It looked like he had gotten beaten up. And it was really shocking because I had stopped watching, had left my room, came back in, and just saw his face. And I genuinely thought he got injured. Maybe he fell down the stairs or something. So I think that was just from trying really, really hard to get Leclerc, because Jeddah is a tiring circuit, but nothing like Bahrain or Qatar when it's 45 degrees. And yeah, I think he's trying a lot, but do you think he could have gotten P3?
Probably.
Okay, let me go on. When the driver ahead of you does a perfect race, no, you cannot achieve more, even if you have a faster car. If the driver ahead is smart and plays it well, he can keep you behind Jeddah. It's not even that hard. We saw it with Verstappen on the first stint, and we saw it last year with Alonso and Russell. All you have to do is sector 1, you take it easy. Let the driver behind you be as close as he wants to, burn his tires, whatever. Then, as soon as sector 1 ends, you have that very wide left-hander corner, hairpin basically, and then the quick chicane right-left that he inputs you into the first straight with the DRS. And the DRS detection is precisely out of the quick chicane. So all you have to do is let the driver behind be as close as you in sector 1, let his tire overheat, then just instead cool down your tires, and because then you're gonna push in those 3 corners. And if you do it well, you can easily open up half a second and be over the 1 second gap at the DRS detection. And once the guy behind misses the first detection point, overtake over, he's not gonna overtake you that lap. And so Piastri and Verstappen were playing this game in the first stint, and then Piastri understood he was not going to win that, and so played cool with the penalty. Leclerc didn't quite need that because he had the perfect strategy. He went 30 laps on the mediums and then switched over to the hards, which, by the way, were the best tires this race. First stint, second stint, the hard was always better. So the only reason we saw the mediums yesterday, was because they were forced to use a different set of tires. Otherwise, they all would have used a set of tires. Anyway, Leclerc played it extremely well on the strategy, did the optimal strategy, and Norris could not reach him. Leclerc did a perfect race, and even if Norris got close in the very last laps, and Leclerc just did precisely what I described. You push and never let him get DRS. And to make sure you just do that, otherwise you have enough pace and he's not gonna take the DRS anyway. But, I don't think the way Leclerc drove yesterday that Norris would have gotten past on a better stride, nothing. There was nothing Norris could have done except hope that Leclerc was not on his best day.
Peter?
I mean, well, he didn't help himself in his battle with Lewis, which I mentioned before, because there's no point trying to overtake at that final turn, because it's in previous years people played DRS chicken there deliberately to try and get DRS for the next straight. So what do you think is going to happen? He's just going to pass you again. So that held him up for a few laps. But at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you just shouldn't have crashed in quali, because I mean, his best Q2 time was only about 0.2 off Max's pole time, so he probably would have had pole position and then just led from the front or whatever. But Ferrari, again, I mean, this is another one where Leclerc, well, I don't know if it was Ferrari themselves, probably not, so rather Leclerc did himself played a good strategy and he ran very long on the mediums, and that didn't help. But yeah, Lando just keeps making all these setbacks for himself, which is not really going well.
For me, obviously, you mentioned Lewis and him not being able to get by him for a couple of laps. Aside from that, I'd say he did a fairly decent enough recovery drive. Obviously, it wasn't like Max would have won from that situation if he was in the McLaren. He did it in Belgium a couple of years ago. He did it at Saudi Arabia, I'm pretty sure, in 23 when he had
from 15th.
Yeah, he did it from 15th.
Yeah. Well, he finished second. He still almost caught Checo.
Yeah, I believe that it wasn't a horrendous drive from Lando. There was no major, obviously, there's no major errors in a way. Obviously, you could argue him not getting by Hamilton instantly was a bit of an error, but it's a tiny faux pas at the end of the day. I'd call it a solid 7 out of 10 performance from Lando. Nothing groundbreaking, but nothing utterly awful from him. I was going to say something and I completely forgotten what it was. But one thing I was thinking of, because Lando was on those hard tyres from the start, and I was thinking, is he going to try and push? Because obviously everyone else was going medium, hard, medium. But I was thinking if the softs could have played a role at all, because obviously Ace has said that the hards were the best tyre, and for me, I don't know how the times looked, but from memory, it didn't look like Lando had a massive fall off towards the end of the stint. Do you think potentially he could have gone to like lap 35, strapped on a set of softs, and pushed until the end?
It appears that nobody really trusted the soft tires. So, from what I understood, they saw in free practice 1 and free practice 2 that the soft tire was graining and the mediums and hards were not. So, most just discarded the soft tires for the race. So, I don't think it was ever on the tables. Whatever pace advantage the soft tires would have given, it would have been counterbalanced by the graining it brought. And instead, the medium, the medium not really, but yes, you could push and not get graining. The hard was the one that you could really push and never get graining. That's why I said Leclerc was on the best possible strategy, because he got himself the best possible race pace in the last 20 laps. Hard, new hards. That was the best. So...
This race seems to demonstrate a recurring theme actually with the tyres as well, that the soft sucks. You can use it in qualifying, but don't touch it in the race. Also, the hards suck and have no grip and don't really do anything, but you have to use them. And it's like, well, I guess we'll just prioritise the mediums because it's better than nothing. And that seems to be happening a lot now.
Yeah, this time the hards were good, but it's just these tire compounds that Pirelli have, because obviously they have how's it called? Something 1 to something 5, T1 to T5?
C1 to C5.
C1 to C5, yeah. So, yeah, obviously there's not enough range, really, because either they don't know which ones to choose, or even when they choose correctly, the softer one that they choose isn't good enough, and the hard one can be good, but mostly isn't. Yes, Ace.
Yes, yes, there is this problem that this year the Pirelli tires are weird. They behave like they never have done before. Last time in Bahrain, for the first time in nobody remembers when, Pirelli brought down the minimum pressure of the tires by 1 whole PSI, which was basically unprecedented by Pirelli. They usually just brought the minimum pressure up. And I read a line the other day commenting this, and basically it said that the Pirelli was able to completely erase all the graining issues on their tires. With the 2025 tire, they no longer have graining. They completely erased it. And so without graining, there is no really degradation of the tire's performance. And so we see these races where the soft tires goes long, the medium tire goes long, the hard tire goes long, and it changes from race to race which one you can use. But if all the tires can go long, it's all gonna be one-stoppers. And so in Jeddah, it worked out. Why? Because there's this rule that teams have to use different compounds of tires. And so the inherent wear of the tire and the fact that the teams are forced to use different kinds of tires, it creates a strategy. It is not what we were seeing in the previous years from Pirelli, but we still see something. It's artificial, okay? It's kind of artificial, the way that these tires nowadays create the strategy, but it's also going to be artificial, the race at Monaco, where they forced 2 stops. So, yes, if it provides a good spectacle, then it's good enough.
All I'll say is bring back hypersofts.
One thing that might make things interesting, because at the moment with the current tyre rule set for allocation, is that the 3 compounds have to be like consecutive ones. So across the weekend, the only sets you can have, it's either C1, C2, C3, or C2, C3, C4, or C3, C4, C5. Maybe get rid of that rule so that you could have a weekend where you've got C1 and C2 and then C5 as the only compounds or whatever. So because then you've got an enormous range of, even if it means that they end up just not using whichever compound is the crap one, then that messes the strategy up, because the tyres could be potentially completely different from one another.
It's the thing that drivers want. Like, George Russell has been asking for it as the president of the GPDA. Usually you get drivers complaining a bit about, the racing isn't great. This time they're actively complaining about the tyres themselves.
That would be an interesting path of thought, because I know in, for example, Formula 2, the tyre differential between it's usually the softs and the hards is massive. That you'll see like the drivers on the alternate strategy be really far behind, and then when they change onto the softs later on in the race, they're always flying and catching up by seconds a lap. That is an opportunity for an avenue for good racing. But or alternatively, go back to not as bad, but something like Pirelli 2013 or 2012 tyres, where you can't there are races where you do 2 or 3 stops. I don't want the cliff to come within a lap and you have like Raikkonen in China 2012 where he goes from 2nd to 12th in 1 lap. But I want something that's a middle ground between what we have now, which is similar but not as bad as like 2010 when it was just people putting on the first and last lap, and not as extreme as like people putting on lap 5 because the softs are completely gone. I think we should have something in between where every race you're on the borderline between a 1 and a 2 stop or a 2 and a 3 stop.
Yeah, and that's what Pirelli has been trying to do since the beginning. But, at the end of the day, that's what you explained is precisely the problem that Pirelli has. Either they bring a very good product and the races become very linear and predictable and therefore boring, or they bring a very awful tire that behaves erratically, it's shit, it's whatever, and the races become exciting. Because if the tire is really good, then you literally have Bridgestone on 2010. No strategy, no nothing, just very linear races, very boring. I see 2025 very similar to 2010. Very linear races because the tires just don't have much difference between them. They all work. If none of the compounds work, then the teams, the drivers would keep on pitting and changing them because that would be the best way to win the race, the fastest way. So either you have a awful tire and very exciting races, and everybody complains about the awful tire then, or you have a very good tires and boring races, and so everybody complains about the boring tire. The issue here is that we need refueling. That's the core issue. If we had refueling, we can have both great tires and interesting races. But we don't have them, so we don't have refueling, we don't have interesting races. No.
Yeah, it comes down to not having enough variables. Well, from Pirelli to Piastri, a driver who's very happy with the boring situation right now, because if you get pole position, it's easier to win at the moment. So, yeah, starting at the first row also helps. Piastri, his race went well when Max got that penalty, and I feel like we haven't really talked about how he's only in his 3rd season and he's leading the championship by 12 points and 12 or 11 points.
I think it's 12.
Oh, okay. Because I think Norris got
10.
Anyway.
Of 10.
10. Okay. Yeah, so leading the championship by 10 points. First Australian to do so since his manager, Mark Webber, in 2010. And It's something that I generally expected. A lot of people were critical about Piastri's tire management last year in 2023. He was still making a few mistakes, but just because we've been hearing a lot about a driver in his junior career, or of course with the fiasco in 2022, some people kind of forgot that 2025 would only be his third season, and he went through a roller coaster because he started in this really terrible 2023 McLaren, which was suddenly competing for podiums at the end of the year, and then the title last year. So he is responding very well, and as Nedzo said earlier, his thing is consistency, whereas Lando's is pace, and consistency wins you more title than raw pace, as history has shown us. So Piastri, honestly, he is in the best position right now, and he needs to bank on Lando making mistakes, because I really think that when Lando will get a clean weekend, which he will, a lot of people seem to think he will completely break down and will never come back. No, Lando will win a race by 10 seconds in the not so distant future. It won't mean that it will happen. It will happen every time, but Oscar needs to bank on those weekends, and he did. So, yeah, very good weekend from him, and I can only hope it keeps going.
The only thing of that I disagree with is this third season malarkey. Because people have said it with Lando. Oh, it was his like last year. Oh, it's his first season in a title-winning car. It was his 7th season in reality, or 6th. I can't remember which one it was. But I don't get this. Like Lewis Hamilton, I know he was in a McLaren from the start, but he'd already won his title by 2008. Vettel started off in a BMW Sauber, was already championship caliber by 2009, 2010. Like you look at all of the recent champions. I mean, Rosberg is an anomaly because he took 10 years. But you look at like Raikkonen, for example, 2003, McLaren, already in a championship battle. You've got Schumacher. I know Schumacher's like an all-time great, but he was pretty much championship level by the time he jumped into a Formula One car. Even you guys like, Nigel Mansell, again, an outlier. But you look at throughout Formula One history, most of the guys who we're talking about here were championship level by their 2nd or 3rd season. Some took a bit longer, 4th or 5th season. But I think in modern Formula One, if you're not championship level by your second or 3rd season, forget it, to be frankly honest. Because you aren't going to gain much from experience. You'll gain a bit of tyre saving here and there, a bit of racing IQ here and there. That's why Alonso's so wily and so clever. That's why Hamilton has his moments like with the DRS stuff with Norris. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to win him championships, but it's just that extra tiny 1%. That's all you're going to get with an extra few seasons of experience. But yeah, Piastri managed the race well, did what he needed to do. He's very Villeneuve 1997 coded. He is. That's how I see it. Like, not necessarily blowing the socks off the field, not necessarily, like, obviously Villeneuve did do that a couple of times throughout 1997, but he's not showing like fantastic, like, oh my god, this guy's going to win millions of championships. He's just doing enough that he needs to do to be able to cruise to this title, hopefully for his sake.
I do agree that Piastri does not seem like the type to win by 30 seconds by pure rage. So I think that's a big difference with Norris and Verstappen.
Also, Lando keeps drawing attention to all of his mistakes and weaknesses and everything. And it's like, okay, there's an element of, being open about and honest to yourself, but it's also maybe just draw attention to it so much because Oscar's not doing that because he just cracks on with the job, even when last year when he was having, really abysmal qualifyings at points. Because the only mistake he's really made has been in Australia, and effectively it was Lando made the same mistake. It's just it came off worse for Oscar, but even then he still managed to avoid beaching the car and bringing out a safety car and managed to carry on and get some points. So that's a fairly minor error compared to what Lando has done. And yeah, it seems to be a thing now. Every single weekend with Lando, it's like, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I just need to do this better. It's like, well, just get on with doing it better because your teammate's already doing that.
Yeah, sorry. I was just checking because one thing I found interesting about all this was Piastri beating Verstappen off the line. That's unusual. Verstappen usually doesn't get beaten off the line, and this time it happened. And so I was looking for the reaction times, and I finally found them. And Piastri indeed was among the best reaction times of the grid. He was only worse than Alonso, Berman, and Ocon. And of course, Alonso, Berman, Ocon have some kind of toe in front of them. Piastri doesn't. So really highlights how good of a start Piastri had. And that's a virtue, honestly, because Verstappen usually does not fall for such stuff.
Yeah, I mean, also the lights went out almost immediately, so I think they just caught everyone by surprise. But speaking of Verstappen, I think we should probably move on to him and Red Bull. So when you look at the times, obviously without that penalty, he would have. I'm sure he would have come out ahead of Piastri at least, or he finished within 5 seconds. So you could argue that without that, he would have won the race because he already had position. So yeah, good race from him. And like we said, he's kind of in this title battle in name only because he's having races like this where he can just about keep up with McLaren and capitalize on their errors. But then there are going to be more races like Bahrain where the pace just isn't there. So I think it's a very tall order if he wants to take this title. And then Yuki, I mean, okay, he made Q3, that's great, but then crashes on the first lap. So that was all for nothing.
Verstappen drove another very well executed race, except for getting cut off at the launch, which is not really his own fault. And he got the penalty, which is honestly debatable, but I share the reason why he got it. You know, you can be only so much foxy. I don't have the right adjective, sorry. It's not smart. It's tricky in a smart way. There's an adjective for that, I swear, but I don't remember it. So you can just try so much to cheat the system, you know, because it was obvious what Max was trying to do. He was trying to brake very late, so at the corner he was gonna be ahead, but he was never gonna make the corner. But the moment he was gonna get out of the corner, because he was never gonna make it, he was gonna be ahead, and so he could have claimed that he was ahead, and so he remained ahead after he cut turn 2. You know, Alonso did that in Russia 2021. And Alonso that time pointed out this is a very stupid way to enforce track limits. And you know, at least in Russia, the stewards literally said, if you do this in turn 1 and 2, and you cut it off, you just have to go through there, and we will never give you the penalty if you do that. And there was no such ruling in Jeddah, and so the stewards could debate, and this time they reached the conclusion that such a game should be penalized. And so Piastri, who did run Verstappen off, was found in the right and Verstappen in the wrong. But honestly, well played by both of them. Verstappen, it is not at all guaranteed that he could have gotten the penalty because previous precedents suggested that Max was in the right. Another precedent is Abu Dhabi 2021 at the start, when they get to the chicane, Verstappen ran Hamilton off, Hamilton cut the chicane and remained ahead, and Hamilton was not penalized. Verstappen did the same thing Hamilton did in turn 2 at Jeddah, and this time he got penalized. So yeah, I share why he got the penalty.
Was Hamilton penalized? Remind me, was Hamilton penalized for Mexico at that time? Or he just went through in 2017?
2016, no.
It just seemed very selective.
Yeah. I think with their rationale with Abu Dhabi was apparently he had slowed down a little bit, and that was enough to offset the advantage, even though it wasn't. But
yes,
yeah,
that was because they deemed that Lewis should have stayed ahead, and so it was not Hamilton. Okay, the issue in Abu Dhabi was that Hamilton, by cutting the corner, gained a place. You know, the stewards that day decided that Hamilton was ahead, and so by cutting the corner, he did not gain a place. So all he had to do was give up the advantage he got by cutting the corner, and Lewis did. So he did not get a penalty. So it's like Verstappen, after he cut turn 2, he should have given up the advantage he got by cutting turn 2, which in Jeddah really is not an issue, you know. But No, go on, sorry.
Oh, I say, because the thing is, it always used to be before, like back when I first started watching Formula One in like 2012, you always used to hear Martin Brundle say, it's not just if you gain a position, it's just if you maintain a position that you wouldn't have had. And I think we've started to lose that second part of the definition of what is an illegal overtake. And also the fact that we can't just do what we used to do, which is if you make a move that's not right, you get told to hand the position back rather than getting some arbitrary penalty. I think that just handing the position back would have solved a lot of issues in terms of the FIA mandating a position handback, or just clarify the rules a bit more, because no one wants to have all this all of these complicated decisions decided by track limits and who was ahead at the apex and who was ahead at this part of the circuit, and just let them race. And if there's any issues and there's any big issues, then the drivers then you penalise the drivers who are at fault. But if it's these close cases where there is great argument for both sides, just let them race. And if Max wants to do that, if Oscar wants to do that at one point, if Max wants to do that at one point, they can then give the act back to each other, and it produces good racing. It's just complicated. But yeah, that was Max's race. Does anyone want to add anything before we move on to Tsunoda's 5 corners? No, 3 corners.
Yeah, I want to say that I completely disagree with that. I think the stewards had not been enforcing the rules enough so far. Because if you let them race, you get Verstappen doing all the kind of shit he usually does and get away with it for free. You know, if the stewards just let everybody race and don't give penalty in these very close calls, then all the drivers are gonna get themselves into a position where they clearly get an advantage, but they can claim, I made this a close call, so you cannot penalize me. And you get Australia last year between Alonso and Russell. It was a close call penalizing Alonso, so by your opinion, Alonso should not have gotten penalized. But if you don't penalize Alonso for that, Alonso is gonna do that another time. He's gonna get into a very questionable position, which is going to lead to an advantage, and then he can claim, it's questionable that this should get penalized, so you should not penalize me. Verstappen has got away so far by not getting ever penalized for the kind of shit he did. And finally they're kind of enforcing it, and if they enforce it, everything's going to get settled. Alonso and other drivers, Hamilton, they are able to do the kind of shit that Max does, but they do not because they know they risk a penalty, and so they prefer not risking a penalty and do it more legitimately. You overtake the advantage they get. If Verstappen now gets penalized for this very close call, he finally is gonna pull this shit together and he's gonna do the stuff more legally, less questionable stuff. He's finally gonna get better at racecraft, basically. But if he gets away with this kind of shit, then he just keeps repeating it, and he will never improve his racecraft. It's always going to be, he does run the driver off, he cut the corner there, but he took an advantage, but actually he did, but, it's a close call, so let's let him get away with it. He should not be rewarded for setting up close calls.
I think we've exhausted that avenue of thought when it comes to racing incidents. The only thing I will add is Lewis Hamilton got penalised for quite a few incidents in his early career, and look where he was in 2021 and since. That's the only thing I'll say. But we'll now move on to Tsunoda's, as I said, 3 corners. I mean, I only saw the onboard of Gasly for that incident, and I would say, for me, it looked like Gasly left plenty enough room, and it looked, from his perspective, obviously I haven't seen Tsunoda's onboard, but it looked like Tsunoda just understeered straight into the side of him.
I actually think that Gasly shouldn't even have gone for that move, in the sense that, he should have gone for the move, but he shouldn't have been there because there's nothing else he could really expect. I see why you would try to overtake lap 1. You're probably not going to get a better chance. But the car on the inside is never going to give way there. So either Gasly cuts the corner like people have been doing for turn 2, or there's going to be a crash. Because Gasly was very clear about this, by the way, in the interviews. He said he doesn't have much to say because he was ahead, this famous thing that Peter said. He was ahead at the corner, so Yuki should have given way, so he doesn't have much to say on it. But Yuki is only half a foot or a foot away. He's not going to fully stamp on the brakes for Gasly to go by and also jeopardize the next 2 turns. And I think there's there's this long swirly section coming along, so you can't fully stamp on the brakes and then probably get overtaken by the cars behind. Or actually, even if he stamps on the brake, I'm pretty sure it creates a hazard for the drivers behind. So I don't really know why Gasly would have gone on the outside there, because there just wasn't much else that could have happened, in my opinion, at least.
I think this goes back to Peter's earlier point of bad track design, because the track goes from being you can fit 2, maybe even 3 cars wide going into turn 3. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that because of actual racecraft, but it goes from possibly 3 cars wide to an undoubted 1-line corner. Like, what I think they should do at that corner, because you've got the wall on the inside, which so many drivers have like tapped over the years and just slightly skimmed as they go over the curbs. I think they should open that wall at the inside so it acts like a normal corner where you have a little curb on the inside and you've got that extra maybe half a foot of room on that inside so that people can potentially go side by side. It's just bad track design, I think, because they're trying to get the walls as close as they can to the track surface, but it produces these awkward case situations where you go from being possibly 3 cars wide to being 1 car wide, because you aren't going to fit any cars side by side for the S's because it just doesn't work. So again, we're back to another instance of we're talking about track design. Maybe the FIA, when they homologate circuits, should actually abide by their own rules rather than look, oh yeah, the Saudis have given us 600 million pounds. Let's just go off of that rather than actual common sense.
This circuit, I think, has one of the worst corners to overtaking spots ratios ever, because there's 27 corners, but only 2 realistic overtaking spots, and one of those already is invalidated by having consecutive DRS zones, and then the other one is not really a proper overtaking spot because it's almost impossible, as I said, to overtake without someone going off track there. So it's just they've just completely blown this, and this is again a thing of that a lot of old school drivers complain about modern circuit design because they become so twisty and technical. It's like you can't follow, you can't pass like we could in the day. And also back in the day, they weren't policing the etiquette of racecraft in the same way because it was like, okay, if you've obviously cut the corner, that again you get penalised, but otherwise just have a bit of argy-bargy, and who cares if you go 5 centimetres outside the white line? It's like, how much of an advantage have you really gained from that? You haven't gained 10 seconds off of it. Just let them race and just stop policing everything at the moment.
Yeah.
That crash reminded me of Monaco last year. At the start, the corner before the tunnel, Ocon tried to overtake Gasly and they clocked the lap. Ocon went back to the team and he got lapidated by them. And, you can try to overtake in a corner, but it's almost always gonna end horribly. And the same holds for turn 4 at Jeddah. You can try to go side by side in the corner. Either you go off or you're probably gonna crash. Tsunoda and Gasly are absolutely not the 2 drivers I can see going side by side into turn 4 and not touch. I can kind of imagine Alonso and Hamilton, Verstappen and someone else. Maybe Verstappen is kind of tricky. I can see Leclerc and Russell doing that. Piastri, not many other drivers. Hulkenberg maybe. Yeah, I'm running out of people. So I'm just gonna think, if Schumacher, Hakkinen, Frentzen, Irvine, Ralf Schumacher, Jan Trulli, all these old school guys were to race at Jeddah, how would the race have been? Would these guys have tried to overtake in turn 4, and how would it have ended?
There definitely would have been more crashes, in my opinion. But yeah, again, I feel like Tsunoda's only option would have been to stamp on the brakes, and there could have been easily a bigger crash behind. So yeah. Well, the last driver that we haven't mentioned from the top teams per se, well, there's Mercedes coming, but from the 3 teams we've been talking about, Lewis, he had a very hard time this weekend. He was complaining a lot, as he does when he's not in the top 5. Apologies for the Lewis fans, but that's what he does. So he was calling the car undrivable at times. He couldn't get around it at all. And it was yet another race where he just kind of was nowhere. He was in front of the entire midfield pack, but he was behind all the other front runners. So, yeah, well, what do you make of this race? Because I think it really showed how it's not going to be easy for Lewis at Ferrari at all. I mean, we knew it, but I think yesterday was the clear indicator of the gap between Leclerc and Lewis in a race like this, where it's a bit tricky, and the gap where the gap when that car is not handling exactly as it should be. Leclerc manages to perfect his strategy, whereas Lewis is just constantly struggling on his tires.
I think I saw a Twitter post, and obviously that's an oracle of amazing, perfect information. that said that in both stints, Lewis was around, I think it was 8/10, 9/10 off of Leclerc per lap during the race. And I was like, don't get me wrong, we've bashed Lewis for being off the pace of teammates and off the pace of rivals throughout his time in Formula 1 when perhaps he shouldn't have been. But it's never been this bad. Like, Leclerc is a top driver. He's top three. He's top three, top two drivers on the grid. Arguably, for some people, I think top three is fair, but not top two. But Lewis is supposed to be, with his accolades, is supposed to be at least in the ballpark. Like, we've seen some drivers struggle to adapt to new surroundings. Sainz, literally for the first few races, looked like he was a B-Tech Roberto Meri, and yeah, it's just the case that with Lewis, it just seems like nothing is working. Like, he's like, I can't adapt, and the car isn't working for me, and I'm not working for the car, and I need a new brain and stuff like that. It's just not working. I think he's really underestimated how big a change this will be for the culture that he's working in, for the car that he's driving, for everything. Trying to do all of that at 30, if he'd gone to Ferrari from McLaren, it would have been difficult. To do it at 40, and to do it when you're coming off the back of, let's be honest, 2021 wasn't the best season. 2022 wasn't either. Neither was 2024, arguably the worst of a lot. He had 3 stinker seasons out of the last 4. And now he's gone to a completely new environment. He's now basically reaping the downfalls of what he created by instigating this move. And I have a feeling he's just going to end up like what Nigel Mansell's move to Ferrari was. Maybe not because Prost showed potential in 1990, but I think he's going to end up where Mansell got shown up by Prost in 1990 and was and just left. I think that's what's going to happen. I think that Lewis is either going to get to the end of this year and be like, you know what, screw this, I'm out, or get to the end of next year because he's going to try and hang it out and see if he can improve. But at the moment, this is just not good enough. Like, Lewis is not doing horrendous. Like, he's not Sergio Perez 2024. But when your teammate is getting a podium and starting to hold off the guy in the fastest car, don't get me wrong, Lewis held Norris up for 2 laps, but that wasn't because he was good. That was because Norris was not as good. Nothing is working.
We left last year with the question, is Hamilton struggling because of the Mercedes car, or is Hamilton struggling because of the ground effect cars, or is Hamilton struggling because he got too old? You know, I think we're only 5 races in. We shouldn't judge. There will be a technical directive which will have quite an impact on all the cars, so maybe things will change after the technical directive. But yesterday, Lewis went to the media and said, I'm not comfortable with this car. I struggle, I have to push, I have balance issues. I have to adapt and I'm struggling to do that. I don't think this will ever improve this year. He said that he doesn't think things will get better before the end of the year. He doesn't think that in this 2 weeks break before Miami, he can find a solution to his own problems. And he doesn't think he will find a solution to his own problems before December. So I think with this, we can conclude that the answer to the question was not, the Mercedes was not the problem. So we really will wait next year to see if the issue was the ground effect cars or if the issue is Hamilton himself.
At the moment, I think it's clear. Well, he doesn't like ground effect. He hasn't adjusted to it well. He's, getting older, hit 40. But also, Jeddah is clearly one of his weakest circuits, which might be not helped by the fact that, aside from 21, he's only raced there with not particularly competitive cars. But when you look at his results, it's 1st, 10th, 5th, 9th, and 7th. And that first win, I mean, it shouldn't have been that difficult because Max, we saw how close Max came to putting in the lap of the century in qualifying. But this was when Lewis had that rocket in the back of his car and it shouldn't have been that marginal on pace. And again, with the pace in the race as well. But this also, a lot of the newer circuits, because Zandvoort he's not brilliant at. Miami, he's just okay. Baku, he's all over the place. Like, he seems to really excel at the old school circuits like Silverstone, Spa, Monza, Hungaroring, Suzuka. That's where all of his best results come in. He just doesn't seem to like the modern ones. But
Catalonia.
yeah, we'll see. Yeah, Catalonia as well. It's the ones from way back in the day and the ones he started out on, really. But unless he has assurance that next year they will have a good car, he may just decide to retire. I don't know, because active aero, that's new for everyone, because even Alonso doesn't go back that far to when we last had it, and it's going to turn. It's a completely different. It's going to be a completely different way of driving. If Jack Doohan's crash in Suzuka is going to anything to go by, it could mean that we're going to have a lot of problems like that as well. There's probably going to be people crashing because their DRS or whatever, the active aero just doesn't seizes up for whatever reason and all that stuff. But if that's something that lends itself well to him, then sure, because he clearly was at his best on the hybrid era type cars. But it's hard to say.
The thing that I think the reason why Lewis isn't good at Jeddah is obviously, yes, it is one of the newer circuits, but also his advantage when it comes to driving has always been under braking. And let's think about it. At Jeddah, there's 2 heavy braking zones: the first corner and the last corner. Everything else is just either flat out, a little lift, or like a brake and a 2 downshifts. He doesn't have the same advantage. Like, you look at all the other modern circuits, like Miami, there's a couple of big stops around the lap. There's other, like Zandvoort, it's a very tight and twisty circuit. Obviously, those circuits he hasn't been great at, but Jeddah particularly, like, he got knocked out in Q1 in 22. He that Mercedes, was that before or after he had that massive quick engine put in that he dominated with Brazil? That was after, wasn't it?
It was Brazil onwards. It was the last 4 races in 21.
So yeah, so he had that engine in, and he still struggled to a win. We'll say, even if in the end, on the balance of everything that happened that day, he probably did deserve it. It was still a struggle in what was the best car on the grid. 22 getting knocked out in Q1 and does nothing. 23, I don't remember. His race was so anonymous. And then last year, admittedly, he was on a different strategy, but he got beat by Behrman. It's just, yeah. And he nearly got knocked out in Q2, was it, this year? He's just really sloppy. And
he was 7 thousandths away from getting knocked out in Q2. And if Williams had simply not put Albon on this weird alternate quality strategy of making laps 4 or 5 minutes before anyone else, Lewis was out for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and last year Behrman almost knocked him out in Q2 as well.
Yeah, he's just
a bit in the race.
He's just a bit of a nightmare here at Jeddah. And I think it's a mix of new circuits, which we've established, Peter's established that he's not good at, and the lack of braking zones. He's in a new car.
He obviously cares too much about human rights to care to perform in Saudi. Can you stop being so critical of his goodwill? Thank you.
He's being burdened by being overly virtuous. It's slowing the car down.
His reverse Perez or Piastri. Perez and Piastri only perform in countries with bad human rights. And
yeah,
Lewis
exactly.
And Felipe Massa as well was the same. He only ever won in the Middle Eastern races and the really boring ones as well, where nothing happened.
Felipe Massa in Istanbul. Wow.
Yeah, and then fucking Bahrain and Malaysia, everyone else. Those are the ones he always would win at. But there's also, because you said the braking thing, but that being said, that Suzuka is probably one of the least brake-heavy circuits, and that's one of his good ones. But then also, Monaco he's a massive blind spot for Lewis, because his results, he's got second, first, 12th, 5th, 6th, 5th, 4th, 2nd, 3rd, 1st, 7th, 3rd, 1st, 7th, 8th, 4th, and 7th. Those are not brilliant results for Monaco.
What his wins at Monaco been in the wet?
His wins, so 08 and then 2016, but that was because of Red Bull being stupid. Yeah. And then 2019 because he had the best car. And Max wanted to win it, but then he was given a penalty for something. That one, he's never been good there. But
08 was by a lot?
Oh, wait, that was when he hit the wall. And still they repaired the tyre because Massa had pole. He went off into the escape road at turn 1. Yeah, that race had a few safety cars because Rosberg crashed at the swimming pool. And that was when Kimi.
His engineer said, "Keep it composed, Fernando. You're P2," and then he crashed 1 second later. So
yeah, and Kimi crashed into 8. I remember back in the day when everyone was simping for Adrian Sutil, and everyone was like, "Please just get a point." And now everyone's like, "Where the fuck is he? He's busy just crashing cars in Monaco and." Possibly having a clandestine secret gay relationship with Lewis. We don't know. Right? He was on course for 4th, yeah, and then he got rear-ended by Kimi with a few laps to go. Those results. But then, Lewis's strongest circuit is Silverstone, which is not really much of a heavy braking track. because that one, third, first, 16th, second, fourth, eighth, fourth, first, third, second, first, second, first, third, and first. It's
Oh,
Yeah. It's a good point to make. I think Monaco is just a bit of an anomaly. Like, there are drivers who are, let's say, not the best. Although, like, they'll be decent enough at most circuits, but then they just go off at Monaco because of style or whatever. Like, I know it's historic, but guys like Graham Hill, never really the best driver, but at Monaco, he could thrash Jim Clark. And then you've got guys like Maurice Trintignant. In any other circuit, he was an average kind of guy who could get on the podium every now and again. He won 2 races at Monaco from like 10th on the grid. So it's clear that it's a track that requires a certain finesse, a certain style, and some drivers can and some drivers can't. And I think Lewis is one of those that can't really, because Schumacher's got a good record around there. We mentioned guys like that. The only proper generational, the only one that's really like legendary driver who doesn't really have much success around Monaco is Jim Clark, and that's probably because he missed 1965, and had he not done that, he'd have probably won it.
I always said Vettel wasn't stellar in Monaco, but people always are quick to try to debate. So yeah,
he won 11, 17. It was just those two, I think he won.
who won in 13?
Rosberg. Rosberg won it like 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
3 years in a row. And 14 was the incident.
The incident. 15 was Lewis getting screwed in strategy. I can't remember the details on that. I remember nothing about 2015 because why would I? But Monaco again, it's not really a hard braking circuit because it's so slow that you don't really have to brake that hard. So maybe that has an effect, but it just doesn't seem to line up well with him. And he has a bunch of circuits where he's all. I mean, like Interlagos, he's got an honorary citizenship with Brazil, but again, his results there are pretty garbage as well, and not brilliant.
Even though it is also
another thing that's not brilliant is we're past the hour mark and we're left with 7 teams to cover. So let's move on to Mercedes, because George this weekend, again, a lot of potential in quali. People thought that he could threaten for pole. And he also thought so. He said that there was a 10th and a half in it. So that also goes with what I said with Red Bull and McLaren leaving a 10th on the table. It could have been very, very tight, I think, if everyone got their lap perfectly. But his race just came undone. When he pitted, he completely fell off. He was so far behind Charles. It seems like these temperatures just don't suit the Mercedes at all. He just wasn't happy, even though he finished P5, which makes him maintain his streak of finishing in the top 5 in every competitive session this year, which he had also done last year for quite a long while, I believe. But yeah, that car is still very inconsistent. It is a good car for sure, and George is definitely an outsider who's gonna, I think, bounce on any mistakes that the McLarens might make. But they need to figure out the car, and I'm sure Ace will have a few things to say on Antonelli's race as well.
I listened to both the comments the drivers made after the race, and it appears to me that they have a common problem. The car just was not working, especially on the hard tire. Antonelli felt forced to pit so soon from the medium tire because it just didn't have the grip, the front, the balance. And he went to the hard tire and basically had the same problems, and so just managed the tire. And only towards the end, in the last 10 laps, did he finally feel the tires, the car, and avoided getting overtaken by Lewis Hamilton, basically. Instead, Russell has the same problems, but he reached them in the opposite way. Russell was pushing on the hard, and then he decided to pit quite early. But he wasn't compelled, as Antonelli was. He was more strategically oriented. Anyway, he went on the hard and felt that the car was no longer as good as it was the stint before. And anyway, he tried to push to stay close to the cars in front. He was fighting with Piastri and Verstappen. And basically, the tires overheated and immediately hit the cliff. And in the last 10 laps, he had no pace. He was 1 second per lap slower than Antonelli. Antonelli went from being 20-something seconds behind Russell halfway through the race to finish 7 seconds behind Russell. So I truly think that the Mercedes simply was not in the battle was the fourth best car at Jeddah. So yeah, fifth and sixth, right? Okay, fifth and sixth are good positions given their cars, and they shouldn't be ashamed. Yes, in qualifying they could have done better, but you could do better. But if you have no pace, you're just gonna get overtaken. He could have done nothing to avoid Leclerc overtaking him. Even if he went on the same strategy that Leclerc did, Russell was not gonna keep Charles behind. The car simply wasn't good enough to do that.
Mm.
But
That
I
seems to
guess
you
what
agree on
anything.
that? Go on, Peter.
That seems to have stumped everyone. Yeah, I mean they're not Mercedes. I think they don't need to be concerned. I mean they're it seems like they're marginally better than last year. George is being nice and consistent. I mean he's not fighting for the title, but he can do a Vettel 2015 or a Kimi 2012, be there or thereabouts, and that. And yeah, Antonelli is getting better with each race, and just settling in very nicely and getting very competitive. And he's still, points average wise, he's still in like the top 40. I think he's dropped down to only a points average of 7.5 after 5 races. So he's still there. Whereas like Oscar is Oscar's on about 9.4, so he's almost overtaken Leclerc. So yeah, they're doing well, Mercedes.
Two things I'm going to ask you all here. Do you think that Kimi Antonelli in the first 5 races of 2025 did better in that Mercedes than Lewis did last year? And do you think he's doing better than Lewis is currently in terms of overall performance?
Okay, currently, yes, because Lewis is just struggling too much.
Yes.
Compared to last year, I'd say not quite. I'd say actually that Antonelli so far has been lucky. The Mercedes isn't straight up a car that fight for wins. It is a top car, but it changes from track to track, and when he had that bad race in China, but he had damage, it didn't matter much. He only finished behind one midfielder. And Mercedes, where did Russell finish? Oh, yes, in the podium. Yeah, never mind. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that Antonelli is in that space where if he underperforms, he doesn't lose much. And if he delivers, then he gets moderately good results. So it's hard to look bad in the position that Antonelli is. He's been struggling so far in quali, and he was, 4 tenths behind Russell in Q3? Yeah, he did make a mistake in Sector 1. So anyway, even if you were closer, if you were 3 tenths behind Russell, okay, that meant being from P3 to P5. If he were in the midfield, he would have been out in Q1 with Russell advancing to Q3. We would not be talking about Antonelli improving. We would be talking about how the fuck is Antonelli getting out in Q1. He clearly is underperforming. So I'd say currently Antonelli is in this lucky space where the struggles he has in quali don't matter much, and then he's close to Russell in the race, so he just looks good. If he were in a tougher position, we would start to criticize Antonelli, just like last year we did with Lewis, except Lewis sometimes last year did amazing races. Antonelli still has yet to do that.
Yeah,
He's also
and
a rookie though, whereas Lewis has 360 races
Yes,
behind him.
absolutely.
Yeah, and it also goes with what people say on Bortoletto, for example, where you have no idea how he's performing at Sauber because Sauber are so far lost. And yes, he's P20, but is he doing bad or not? Well, actually, let's just move on to Sauber. It makes no sense, but let's just cover Sauber very quickly because there's not going to be a better time. Again, bottom of the bunch, both cars out in Q2. But Bortoletto finished. No, do hand over to Bortoletto now. Yeah. So but Bortoletto finished last at the very last second. His main thing in the race was that he nearly crashed his manager out, which would have been very interesting because I don't think we've ever had a manager race at the same time as his, what would you call it? Client, yes, as his client in Formula One, because it's a very rare arrangement. And I really think that arrangement was made with the thought that Alonso would not be in Formula One by the time some of his clients would, eventually possibly make it to Formula One, because Tsolov, Marti, Bortoleto, they're all much younger. And when they joined A14 management, they were still in Formula 3 or in karting. Bortoleto was with A14 since karting, actually. And he had a very quick progression, rookie champion Formula 3, rookie champion Formula 2. So we have this very weird situation, which really is a conflict of interest when you think about it. It's not spoken about a lot because it's not that big of a deal technically, and because we've had so much worse with Flavio and his engine deals and some of the things we had with, team principals also managing drivers personally, which is also the case with Riyatu Renduan, by the way. So we've never had this situation, and it should be an issue. It just isn't because no one really cares. But yeah, Bortoleto nearly, and also as Peter actually mentioned before we started recording, I don't think Alonso expected to. Well, when Bortoleto joined Sauber last year, I don't think Alonso expected them to be that slow. So yeah, Bortoleto just about avoided a huge crash with Alonso, which would have been quite major because that is when Alonso was starting to brake, so he was on 280 kph, would have gone straight into the wall. God knows what would have happened. So yeah, Bortoletto's hard to assess right now. I'd still say he's doing the job because in quali he's holding up to Hülkenberg, who was absolutely decimating Magnussen. Hülkenberg is the one who's a bit disappointing, but yeah, what do you think?
I'm going to be honest. I don't really the conflict of interest. I don't really. Yes, it's a funny little quirk of this modern Formula One, but I don't really see a problem with it. It's not like Alonso or Bortoletto is going to see Alonso on track if they are together on track, and he's going to go, "Oh, go through, my friend, you're my boss." It's not gonna work like that. They're going to race each other just as hard, if not slightly cleaner than they would have otherwise. But that's it. I don't really see any issue. They'll just be a bit more cautious around each other, which is arguably better for everyone involved. And it's not like other teams and teammates don't do that to each other, and the Red Bull sister team doesn't do that to the main team and all that sort of stuff. As for Bortoletto's actual performances, he's doing all right. Like Hülkenberg is a good benchmark. It's like there's been a lot of talk this weekend around Formula 2 and should these veteran drivers like Richard Verschoor exist? Should there be like a 3-year limit on how many years you can do in Formula 2, for example? And I say no, because those guys are a good benchmark, a good staple in the series for young guys to go up against and say, is this guy good? Can he beat a Verschoor? Can they beat a Boschung? Can they beat a Giotto? Yes, so they're good. That's what I see with Hülkenberg. He's a good driver. He's been level or beating guys like Sainz, guys like Ricciardo, guys like Perez when they were teammates. He's clearly a talented driver, and he's a perfect yardstick. Bortoletto is matching up just as well as he needs to right now. Hülkenberg has been slightly underperforming, but then again, he also does have these amazing performances. We haven't seen one of those amazing Hülkenberg style, where the fuck did that come from qualifying laps yet? But I think that's because he's in a Sauber, and I think this is one of his only poor moves in his career. He's always, typically when he's moved team, he's moved up. Like, he went from Williams, and I think going from Williams into 2010 to Force India in 2012 was a slight move up. Going from Force India to Sauber was a slight move up. Going back to Force India was compared to where Sauber and Force India were in 2014, massive move up. And then he goes to Renault, which probably a bit more stagnant. And then goes to Aston Martin or / Racing Point again, and that is a move up again. And now I think he's finally, obviously went to Haas, and that was more of a sidestep. I think finally he's had a first downgrade of his career, and I don't think he cares as much because he knows he's not fighting for points, which is what he's always been good at, getting consistent points. Now he's not fighting for that. I don't think he cares. He's going to hope that Audi, for 2026, that Audi comes in and solves everything. Obviously, we've talked in the past about how 5-year plan that hasn't worked, and they haven't done what they needed to do to get that team up to scratch. But I think Bortoletto's doing decently well. Hülkenberg's doing slightly less well, I'd argue, but not horrendously. And that Team Sauber, the car is bad, but the drivers are decent enough that they shouldn't be slated.
Yeah, Bortoletto had... Yeah, of course he's a rookie, so he's excused. He's on the worst car on the grid with so messy the Sauber. All the time on the podcast during the races when we cover Sauber, we just tell how bad the car is and the team, and the drivers aren't delivering as they should have. Anyway, this time, just by chance, I kind of figured out the story behind Bortoletto's weekend, because he had missed FP2 due to a fuel leak. And so you understand a rookie, a Jetta, on the worst car, and you even take away the most important session before qualifying. He was never gonna be prepared for quali. You cannot expect much from him, and he decided in FP3 due to the time he lost to just focus everything on quali. He used I think 3 sets of soft tires in FP3, and so then in Q1 on the last lap he made a mistake. He spun. We all saw. And so he did not improve at all. He screwed up qualifying, which is kind of to be expected. And so he was left with basically no tires for the race. He had one new set of mediums, one new set of hards, and he decided to just, after the first safety car, to even YOLO the strategy. And so he pitted after lap 1 for the hards. And so he had no tires left. There was no safety car before the end, so, that's the race. Horrible weekend, so messy. That he had a better performance. It is clear, given what we saw, just so messy, so much risk he took, and it didn't work out. So he's excused this time. And Hülkenberg had a very straightforward race, worst car on the grid, so just did well to hold Stroll behind, although Stroll was put on the most horrible strategy possible. So even that is not much of an accomplishment.
Well, let's just quickly look at Bortoletto's rival then, because Gasly, as we said, his race ended early because of the crash with Tsunoda, but he did get into Q3, so more consistency from him. We're starting to see shades of the 2021 AlphaTauri Gasly, where you see that when he's in a midfield team where the entire team is backing him up, he does perform very well. And I think he's one of those drivers whose sweet spot is exactly that, being in confidence with a midfield team that has high ambitions. But we know that, Alpine's not going to go back to the very top. But at least in terms of Gasly's performance, that's the best he can get at the moment. And Doohan, he was quite slow this weekend. Honestly, I've been trying to be like, he's not been that bad, even because Gasly is a very high benchmark, especially when Gasly is confident. But Doohan, yeah, he, getting that final overtake on Bortoletto is not enough. So, yeah, what did you think about them? About Doohan, actually?
I think the Alpine was competitive here at Jeddah, just like it was in Bahrain. Although in Bahrain it was clearly the best midfielder, here in Jeddah it was not clear at all. But it was competitive in the midfield. He was the Alpine. I consider it better than the Racing Bulls, and close. Although I consider ahead the Williams. Doohan, I don't know what happened. He was out in Q1. And that basically was it. Because in the race, he also, like Bortoleto, pitted on lap 1 for hard tires, hoping for a safety car at the end and get on some lucky strategy. It did not work out, obviously. And so, likewise, he pitted at the very end again and overtook Bortoleto just. Ocon was the only other driver who also pitted on lap 1, trying to go for the wacky strategy. It also didn't work out, obviously. So, yeah, Doohan there is explained. I don't know why he was out in Q1. Struggles, a mistake, I don't know. In a way, underperformed. I do consider that the car was going to be fighting for the points, so that Gasly was taken out by Tsunoda lap 1, I think it's a huge blow to the team. Because that Alpine was not good enough to score in China, it was not good enough to score in Japan. Australia, maybe. I don't think it was either good enough to score in Australia, although circumstances certainly would have allowed it. And finally, it was only competitive the Alpine in Bahrain, and there they delivered, and here in Jeddah. So that's they're still 9th in the championship, guys. That's not good. That team should be higher up. That team should be much closer to Haas in the standings, definitely ahead of the Aston Martin, and they aren't. So this was a blown chance, unfortunately, for them.
I think that Doohan is just a massive letdown. Now, don't get me wrong. There have been teams where they've had one particular driver who's focused on, like we've seen with Red Bull, they don't mind if the second driver is getting 7th and 8th while the lead driver is winning. But when it comes to midfield teams, you always need both drivers firing on 4 cylinders. And like we've had it in previous years, like for example last year with Hülkenberg and Magnussen, one driver was firing on all cylinders and one driver was firing on 7, it seemed. If we're going off a V8 engine configuration, I should have said 5 cylinders instead. But it's that sort of thing. Doing just me isn't F1 level. Like I've said it before, I'll say it again. Came third in F2 2 years in a row, and the more years you spend in F2, especially not getting results, it just proves how not Formula 1 caliber you are. And he's not a bad driver. He's not awful. He's not the worst driver in history. He's not even the worst driver of the last 15 years. But he's just not good. He's just blindingly average. Like, how do you consider? Like, we talked about having ninth in the standings. That car is not ninth. It should be at least 7th, maybe even 6th in the standings. And him fighting Bortoletto for last place. Come on, it's just not good enough.
Yeah, he's kind of only marginally better than what Sargent was doing. Just, I mean, he's not crashing as much, but the performances, there's just nothing really going on there. And well, this is the 5th race, so Miami is race number 6, so that's when everyone's thinking maybe then he'll go. But otherwise, he may just last the season and then they just get rid of him, and he's done basically nothing, and he just becomes another anonymous midfield driver for the record books.
Yeah, it isn't looking great. When he drops performances like this, you do wonder if it would be unfair if he gets dropped soon enough. Well, let's look at the two midfield. The fun of the race, actually, the two midfield contenders who were in the points. So Williams and RB, I think we can look at them together. They had very, very close strategies. So Lawson actually outqualified Hadjar, but Hadjar jumped him early on. And after overtaking Alonso, he had set off to chase down the Williams. Now, the issue is that the Williams decided to work together very, very well. And if they hadn't done that, I think it's very likely that Hadjar would have gotten P8. In the interviews, he was saying that when he made the junction to Albon, he thought it would be easy pickings and 4 points were on the cards, but nope. Sainz and Albon executed the race perfectly. Sainz slowed down a bit to give DRS to Albon, and they just stayed in that formation until the end of the race. So Hadjar got a point, and Williams got 6, which was a double points finish for Williams. Very good for them. They keep showing the improvements over the last few weeks. And Albon would have very probably made Q3 just like Sainz, if not for a really dumb quali strategy. So they are very fast in quali, especially. There were some tweets going around that they were even faster than what we had seen, because the underlying data suggested that Sainz and Albon could have basically qualified P5 and P6 or P5 and P7. It's very hard to read into this because you never know how much they've been using energy in a specific part of the track. So sometimes Sector 1 could be much better, but then the data is not taking into account that Sector 3 will not have as much energy to use. But one thing is sure, it's that Williams is performing very well and RB is just behind, with Hadjar really, really starting to make a mark for himself. He was a driver that I always thought was quite good, but I never thought he would be this confident in his first few weeks in Formula 1, especially with his crash in Australia, which came before the race had even started. What did you think, Ace?
I thought that the Williams, we don't really understand where it was in the pecking order this race. I think it's quite clear it was the best midfielder, but was it closer to the guys in front than it was to the midfield? Because, as you said, Williams, both drivers, underperformed in quali in one way or another. Albon, in his best lap in Q2, screwed up both the turns in the last sector, and he was out of Q2 by 0.007 seconds. So instead, Sainz, who got into Q3, he was in his Q2 lap losing to Albon in Sector 1 and Sector 2. So basically, he was still not on the pace of Albon, just like it was in the previous weekends. And so just because he did a correct Sector 3, he got through and beat Albon. So yes, Sainz still was not on the pace, and Albon, who was, screwed up and did not get into Q3. So we don't know the pace of the car in quali, And realistically, we don't even know the pace of the car in the race, because Sainz was told to slow down, give the DRS to Albon, and make sure that Hajar does not overtake either car. And so Sainz had to slow down. Only on the very last lap of the race did Sainz push. And he set up 32.5, which is half a second faster than what the other drivers in the midfield were doing, and half a second slower than the guys at the front were doing. So realistically, in the last 15 laps, he was told to slow down, Sainz. So 15 laps times 0.5, that's 7.5 seconds. That Sainz could have been further in front. So basically it goes from 60 seconds behind the leader to 50 seconds behind the leader. And I think Hamilton is 40 seconds behind the leader. So Sainz, I think, almost would have been closer to Hamilton than he would have been to Albon. And that's considering they ended up performing quali. So yeah, realistically, you wonder where that Williams could have been this weekend. I don't think it would have been any better than 8th and 9th, but they could have been closer to the front, likely. About Hajar, I think he drove an excellent race. He was the other guy, just like Leclerc, who went very long on the first stint, and then pitted and had the optimum tire at the end. Probably, could he have done the overtake on Albon? I think so, but it's debatable because I follow very closely there. And the Hajar simply could not follow the Williams in turn 22. In the last sector, he could have been half a second behind Albon. He would exit turn 32 8 tenths behind Albon. And that is unrecoverable. You had to exit the corner faster than the car in front, and instead, not only you lose, but you also exit slower than the car in front. You could argue that Hajar would never have been able to make the overtake. And it's not even that bad because the Racing Wolves was not at the level of the Williams. So I think Hajar delivered a very well executed race, got the maximum out of the car. I don't think the overtaking would have been possible even without DRS. Instead, Lawson, I think, is still struggling with the car. He was not on the pace of Hajar, got a slow start, a bad start, lost places. He had qualified in front of Alonso and Hajar, and did not hold the position.
He also, just to mention Lawson, he got a 10-second time penalty for an incident, I'll say, with Doohan. I'm baffled at that one, to be frankly honest. He goes off track, rejoins in a safe manner, and having already overtaken Doohan on the previous straight, he goes deep and then does what he does, and then comes back onto a circuit. Doohan's right behind him, and he gets a 10-second time penalty. And I'm thinking, for what? Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. It wasn't an unsafe rejoin because he was fully ahead. It wasn't like he blocked him. It's baffling. Like, genuinely. If Doohan was really held up, he could have done a switchback and got under and over him and got alongside going into turn 3 or 4. But at the end of the day, when the overtake has already been made, I think that's what they said. I think that was what they said, like he made the overtake or he completed the overtake or maintained the position because he maintained his position because of that mistake. But if that's the case, then it's baffling. It's utterly strange because I don't think it was fair.
So the ruling, the core issue of that ruling is if Lawson had or had he not completed the overtake before he went off. So the dynamic was that Lawson got an incredible exit out of the last corner and basically overtook Doohan halfway through the straight. He overtook it and then covered him by moving in front of him before the braking zone. Into the braking zone, then he went deep and just went with all four wheels off the white line. So he was off the track, just barely. And he didn't cut turn 2, he just tried to re-enter into turn 2 and then awkwardly make the corner. And the core issue is, for the stewards was the move considered completed when he moved over in front of Doohan, or was the move completed after turn 2? Because in the first case, then Lawson went off, it's a track limit warning, and that's it. In the second case, then yes, it is Lawson gaining an advantage by going off the track. And so I would tend to agree with the move was completed once Lawson moved over to cover Doohan. So yeah, I don't really share the penalty, but I do see the reasoning behind the steward's choice. It's another close call.
It's just really flawed logic for me because obviously we've mentioned Verstappen's incident and Oscar's incident. Max straight line turn 2 because because of what he did, and then Lawson doesn't straight line turn 2. He actively tries to make turn 2 and he still gets penalised. For me, it's just conducive to not actually, like, when a driver attempts to make the corner and there is a strong attempt and there is an actual physical thing there, he's actually made that corner, even if it is awkwardly, and he's tried to make that effort, and you still penalise him. It's ridiculous in my opinion. That move was completed after he made a move. If we're saying that you haven't completed a move when you're halfway down a straight and already overtaken him, then I don't know what is a racing move. I don't know what an overtake is anymore at that point. It's ridiculous, and there needs to be some good hard look at the rules because they've clearly got some flawed logic and some utter fuckery to allow what we saw with Lawson and doing. That should have never been a penalty. Maybe a warning. As I said, track limits, that's fine. Maybe a warning for an unsafe rejoin, I wouldn't have minded. But a penalty, a 10-second time penalty for that? Are you joking me?
Even a warning doesn't really suffice, because the thing is, when you look at the onboards, he was further ahead before the corner than after he came out of it, so he didn't gain an advantage. He lost an advantage by running like that. So that's basically giving you a penalty for making a mistake, because I think I don't know if like AI is deciding these decisions or whatever, and it's like, oh, he's cut the corner, therefore that must be an advantage, and they don't look at everything else that's happened. As well, even if he did gain an advantage, he didn't gain 10 seconds by it, unless he tried to do some 4D thing that Alonso would do, and basically took that corner flat out at the perfect angle and went just between the barriers or something. It's like, you don't... He's lost time off of doing that. He hasn't gained anything from it, and it's like, it doesn't then warrant double what Max did. Whereas with Max, you could at least argue he did gain an advantage because he went from being alongside to then actually ahead and cut the corner a lot more, and he gets double the penalty for it. There's just too many penalties in general, but especially when they're just stupid ones like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, in general, the penalties are just stupid, and they're giving 5 seconds when they shouldn't and 10 seconds when they shouldn't. Not enough drive-through penalties, I would say. But yeah, a team that did not gain an advantage this weekend was Aston Martin. Well, Haas as well, but let's start with Aston Martin. 0 points for them. Best result of the season so far for Alonso, P11. I was hoping someone would get a bullshit DSQ at the end just for him to get a point, but Alonso is still one of the only 4 pointless drivers this season, with Doohan, Bortoleto and Lawson. So not a very good bunch for him to be grouped up with. But it was much better. It was one of those races that Alonso called one of his best races, and as much as it sometimes seems like a bit of a gimmick that he uses once a year, especially since his comeback, he seems to always have one of his best races. In 2023, it was easier to see. 2025, yeah, he had a very clean race, to be fair, did not make mistakes, but that car is not in a position where it can reliably and consistently fight for points, and that's the issue, because there were 2 DNFs in key positions for him, so Gasly and Tsunoda, and that still was way too far behind, and a penalty to Lawson. So 3 drivers out of the fray in an era where, we get that's not very common, and he was still quite far from Hadjar. So yeah, not very good for Aston Martin. Stroll became, it's a fringe statistic, but Stroll became the driver with the most Q1 knockouts in history. Again, no one's going to mention it in 2 days, but I thought it should be mentioned. So yeah, not much to say on Aston Martin, but we can only hope it gets a bit faster. What did you think, Ace, this time?
I thought that Haas and Aston Martin, you can really argue all day whichever car was better. I think they were incredibly close. Behrman did not have a good Q2, so he was down in 15th place. Instead, Alonso, on used soft tires, managed even to beat Hajar, and so he started 13th place. And I think that was it. In qualifying, that was the difference. Otherwise, in the race pace, the Haas was basically equal. Behrman and Alonso were... So Alonso was 10th and Behrman 13th. Yes, 13th. And they were separated by 3 seconds after the safety car, and they finished 3 seconds apart at the end. on basically the same strategy. So yeah, I think qualifying decided everything about the outcome between Aston and Haas. And yeah, it changed nothing because neither one scored any points yesterday. And following Alonso's race is tragic because he was in the points after the start and then got just picked off by Hajar in the last corner. And Alonso did the obvious thing. He switched the trajectories, got a better exit, got the DRS, opened DRS, and he was slower than Hajar at the end of the straight. That Aston Martin has an incredibly big issue in top speed. It just generates too much drag. It's incredible how bad that car is. With DRS open, you're slower than the Racing Bulls. And, that same issue later on, he got the DRS of Lawson out of the quick chicane. The next DRS detection is before turn 22. So literally between the DRS detection point 1 and DRS detection point 2, you have a straight. With DRS open, Alonso went on the lap he lost DRS from getting the DRS at the first detection line by 0.983 seconds to losing DRS at the second DRS detection line by 1.009 seconds. So with DRS open, it was slower than Lawson. Alonso had no way to beat the Racing Bulls. Okay, absolutely no way. If any driver had ever gotten DRS of Alonso, he was dead. He was never going to defend that position. He just executed an incredibly well executed race. That's it. And he did a rewarded win with 11th place. And the same caveat holds compared to last race. I said last race you really cannot distinguish an awesome performance from an average one when the car is awful. And here is the same. You cannot distinguish if Alonso had an excellent race or if he really just had an average race and finished 11th because two cars crashed in front and Lawson got a penalty. You cannot distinguish that. Stroll was held out until the very end, hoping for a safety car. Of course, it didn't come out, and of course, the race was ruined. So, you try to YOLO where you are, and if things work out, you're smart. If things don't work out, nobody cares. That's the situation. In Haas, Ocon did the same thing. Ocon YOLO'd by changing the tires after the safety car on lap 1, and it mattered nothing.
What did you think of Behrman during this weekend, Nedzo?
Good, as I said, good in the opening stages of qualifying. A bit underwhelming in Q2. And yeah, this seems to be one of his stronger tracks because he is one of the more aggressive drivers, likes high-speed corners. I mean, he did well last year, and this year, just kind of like I always get worried with certain drivers when they come back to a venue that they had previous success at, because at times, especially when you've got a rookie or someone who's less experienced, they tend to get overzealous, and at a place like Jeddah, overzealousness could end up you stuffing it into a barrier at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and he's not been unbeknownst to do that this season, but he kept it out of the wall and was fine. It's the same with, I was worried about Stroll because he's been doing decently well this season. Going back to Aston Martin, Stroll was doing decently well this season, and I was worried because Jeddah's been his bogey track. He's crashed there numerous times over the years, and I wondered if he was going to do the same this year. But no, kept it out of the walls, even if the strategy was bad.
He's also quite good there, to be fair. In 23, that's where he got his. He was meant to get P4, a dominant P4. Did he get P4? Did he crash out? I don't remember. I think he got P4, right?
You mean which driver?
Stroll in 2023. He was just behind Alonso.
He retired. He got the issue on lap 15 and then went on other 3 laps before he parked the car at the very wide left corner at the other side of the track. And he had parked the car inside the barriers.
Yeah.
He was ahead of Sainz before he retired, but he was behind the Mercedes.
Remember, he was just behind Alonso, and he was just DRS following Alonso everywhere.
In 2023, I don't think it was like that.
He was 4th behind Russell. He then either spun or pitted, apparently, and came out 10th and then crashed.
Okay.
No. Yeah. Okay, I remember. Yes, he was behind Russell, but ahead of Hamilton. And so, yeah, I don't think he would have beaten Russell, so he would have finished 5th place if he didn't retire. he fell down the order because he got a problem, and they tried to pit him with the undercut to try to solve the problem, and it made no difference. So he just at one point parked the car. If anybody remembers where he parked the car, he went completely behind the barriers, so he was out of the track. But the transponder, the FIA, felt it was still on track, so they called it a safety car. And so it was the most useless safety car ever.
No, he crashed in 23.
No, it was last year that he crashed.
that was last year that he crashed.
Yeah, because that was the same race that Berman was in. That's how I remember that.
Yeah.
That was only a few laps in. He was 9th.
Yeah. So yeah, Berman did well. Ocon less so. Like, it's another anonymous performance from Ocon here, where Berman's been doing his good recovery drives over the past couple of races, and Ocon, it seems, has lost his way a little bit. I'm not sure if there's anything going on at that team or with him, but like, I've had people say that they're worried if they ever come together on track, that Berman and Ocon might have issues. But it seems they're not coming together on track, not appearing on the same piece of tarmac, fighting for position anyway, because Ocon was on that YOLO strategy, and he let him through. But yeah, it seems like Ocon, it started off well, and he started like China, and in Australia he was decent. But since then, it seems like Berman's just stepped up his game a little bit and has started to show more raw speed.
Yeah, Peter, what have you made of this Ocon-Berman dynamic before we move on to top and flops?
The main thing I'm noticing is that Ocon sucks in qualifying. In terms of average gaps of pole, he's second. He's second from bottom, and he's had a lot of Q1 eliminations. So there, he's not good. In the races, he's doing better, but the car is still kind of all over the place, because after Australia, we were like, okay, this is bad. And then China was like, okay, the car's good. And then it's kind of going up and down a bit. And this was just a race where, because not that much happened and there weren't many retirements, there's not much opportunity to really move forward. So you just get stuck in the midfield. But even so, yeah, Berman's doing fine, I think. And Alonso Ocon is new to the team. So there's always that element of adjustment. But otherwise, Haas are, they're doing well. They're still better than they were under bloody Gunter. So,
well, they're 5th. So, no, Williams fell back to 5th and Hazard 6th. Right?
Yeah, because Sainz finally had a good race. So
yeah, because Ocon, he has this weird thing where Alonso fans will know, Ocon used to really increase his pace over quali. So Q1 he would be like 14th, and then Q2 he would be 10th, and then Q3 he would somehow finish 7th. So I feel like the fact that he doesn't have this long quali session anymore, and that he instantly has to deliver in Q1, is becoming a bit of an issue for him. So yeah, moving on to tops and flops. Who were your tops and who was your major flop? Not too much explanation because we're a bit short on time, but yeah, Peter.
I'll make it easy. I think my tops are Piastri, Verstappen, and Leclerc.
And your flop?
Lando, I think you could say.
Nedzo?
I would say.
Okay,
can I go first?
Yeah.
Okay, I would say Piastri, Leclerc, Hajar.
I'll go quickly before Nedzo. So yeah, Piastri, Verstappen, and Hajar for me.
I'm going to go for Max, Charles, and Hajar. I don't like Hajar, but he did a decent job today.
Yeah, true. As my flop, I would say Lewis struggling that much was a bit unexpected. So just for the race,